Hey, so welcome to Psychosomatic Conversations in November. Today we are talking about the activation of psychosomatic symptoms. And for those of you that joined us last month, we were talking about, is it all in your head or is it real? So today moves into a natural progression of that topic. And we're going to start to go a little bit further, a little bit deeper into some of the root causes of psychosomatic illnesses, psychosomatic diseases, and the environments in which the emotional components help an illness to thrive.
Mm.
So as we explore that more deeply, it allows us to have a foundation for really getting to understand how that pattern can show up in the body, how it not only shows up in terms of the body symptoms, but also some of the behaviors that we notice that individuals may have through their environment, through their home life. And that's today's topic. So today with me, I have Christy Foster. Sean will not be joining us today. He is having a well-deserved rest in a beautiful beach location, which I understand is Byron. So, Sean, I hope you're enjoying your time there, and we're thinking of you today. So, Christy, on this topic, also one of your favorite topics.
Mm, it is one of my favorite topics. I'm excited to delve into this a little more. I think awareness is the key, truly. And part of the reason why we even started these conversations is to bring awareness around the topic of psychosomatics, what it means, how to listen to the body, how to pay attention to some of the activations. And hopefully, with today's call, we can give you some insight, different ways to maybe understand your body, understand the different patterns that you notice, and maybe make a shift to help some of those activations.
Yeah. And before we really get into the topic as well, for a couple of faces that we recognize from being here in our last session, maybe to consider between the last month when we started this topic, if you've actually noticed any shifts or changes within how you're recognizing some of your body patterns. So if at any time during the call you want to add in some comments into the chat, please do, because it's really helpful just to get a feel for what are you noticing in your body. And if I could just ask you to think about a time when maybe you have been under pressure, slightly stressed, slightly out of balance, how would you notice by checking in with your body that your body is giving you an indication that something is out of balance? So if you feel like putting something into the chat or communicating with us, please do. Christy.
Well, I would like to give an example of a client I had just the other day. She had been having extreme TMJ pain for it's been a long time. It's turned into chronic pain. She gets a lot of pain through here. And um, she was asking me, why is this still happening? Why is it still here? I've done all these things. And when I say I've done all these things, she has done massage, acupuncture, um, biofeedback. There was like a plethora of list. And as we were talking about it and the frustration that she felt around her jaw, we started tracking and connecting back to a communication and a conversation that she wanted to have with her partner, wasn't able to have with her partner. And as we were talking, even in the conversation, she started clenching because it created anxiousness in her body. And so as we talked about this conversation that needed to be had, she was actually noticing the activation in her jaw and in her heart because it made her anxious, and then the body contracted. So that's an example of one of those psychosomatic things that as we talk about it and ask questions, we can start to understand why it might be there. As I'm looking at, Maria says, sometimes I find I'm not breathing. And that's a really good example. I'll get that one, Maria. And I would say you're the not breathing deeply, because we're always breathing. It's noticing our breath that is the bigger piece. And sometimes I'll hear clients say, I hold my breath. And yes, we hold it for a minute, and yet we're still breathing. Our body is automatically going to breathe for us. The anxiety will happen and we don't notice our breath. And I think it's more important to notice, if we don't notice our breath and we think we're not breathing, that is the work to come back to, even putting your hand on your heart or your chest and feel your rib cage expand. And I think when people have high anxiety, it's very difficult to take a deep breath. And I would tell you, the only thing I would ask you to do is only notice your breath.
Yeah.
That's very different than taking a deep breath. I have to tell a funny story. I had a client once come in. She had 5 children. She was a busy mother. She is on my table, and I said something like, well, you should probably start noticing your breath and da 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 da. And she goes, well, where can I buy that? She was on such automatic pilot that we started laughing. I said, well, I'm not sure. Maybe Dave's up the road can sell you some breath. Because she had so much on her plate and she was moving so fast. And that's what we talked about, was all she needs to do in a moment in a day is notice her breath to come back and slow down. So it was a funny thing with breath, because we do breathe. We just need to pay attention to our breath.
And that awareness does create the complete change within the body as soon as you start to slow down and notice it. So that brings me into the topic of also taking a look at, when you're taking a look at the mind, you're taking a look at the emotions, and you're taking a look at the physical body. Naturally, we are nourishing all 3 of those zones every day in some way. But how do you nourish your mind? What type of input goes into your mind? How do you nourish the emotions? And when I talk about nourishing the emotions, it's like, how are you being with your emotions? Are they allowed to have a voice? Are they allowed to have a presence? Or would you prefer to skip over some of the emotions that come through? And then physically, how are you nourishing your body? And as we start to take a look at those 3 areas and take a look at the styles of nourishment that your body actually may require, it's like, what areas may require a greater level of nourishment? So as an example, like, you might be watching 4 or 5 hours of TV and it's not nourishing to the mind. 1 hour could be relaxing for the body, but 5 hours could be the wrong input that goes into actually nourishing the mind itself. And it's really important just to not to consider this as a judgment in terms of where are you now, but to do a stock take of actually going, as I am here today, what areas of my life are showing up that may require more nourishment? Even so that you can just simply have the awareness of one thing that you could change to start to change the environment that creates stress within the body, or anxiety in the body, or any of the root causes that become the root cause of illness. What can I change that will actually change the relationship that I have into my internal makeup with my body, and therefore with the symptoms that my body is presenting with?
I have another example about that, Linda.
I like your example.
In our world today, because our world is a little chaotic, and that is the world, not just the United States that I live in, it's the world. And what I've noticed with people is and this is kind of a theme because we have access 24/7 to the news,
Mhm.
to social media. What I find is if that is always accessible and beeping at us, the anxiety level that it can cause doesn't shut off. And I think it's really important to have a time frame to look at all of that once a day to stay informed, or twice a day, but not have that be the constant feeding, because it creates a lot of fear and or it can create anger, both.
Yeah.
And then the nervous system is on, it's activated, and that's really over a period of time can create issues like anxiety, not sleeping, insomnia, some depression because it feels hopeless. As you notice how much time you're spending on the news, on social media is a key point on your phone because we have access to it. Could you slow that down and do less? Because I also think that that can become its own kind of looping and its own kind of addiction to pull us away from what we're feeling, which is what Linda was talking about. And if you shut all that off and access what am I feeling when I turn that off, or to even take social media off your phone for a week,
Yeah.
that causes great panic in people because we get so used to being fed, fill in the blank. And I did do that a couple of weeks ago. I pulled social media off my phone as because I was given the same advice. And I thought, oh my God, I had no idea how much I just out of habit just look at my phone and scroll. And it's been such a good experience for me not to do that by choice,
Yeah.
to watch my own distraction patterns and coming into it creates a lot more peace in my whole world to
Mm.
not, and I still look at it on my computer, but it takes an effort for me to do it instead of having it wherever I'm at.
Reminds me, I had a recent client, and they were saying that every morning they're going through quite a lot of things at the moment, but every morning they wake up and they can hardly get out of bed. And the question that I had for them, because it's a change, I said, what has changed in the half an hour before you go to bed? Is there a change of what you've been doing? And immediately they went, oh, well, I've been playing on like social media and I've been stressed and helps me
Mhm.
distress. But in fact, it actually creates a level of anxiety in the sleep pattern
Mhm.
during the night. So then they're waking up not feeling like they want to get up in the morning. So that simple change, because I asked this client to for a week, just try that pattern and to do something that's relaxing for the mind instead of being activated, to actually do a half an hour of relaxation. Whether basic something that works for her, some music, or something that's just really gentle within her nervous system. And immediately she started to return back to a normal pattern of sleeping.
Mhm.
But magnify that by people that are up really late, gaming for like a lot of the time, wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, can't sleep, go onto the computer. That creates a disruption within the body's um, system in terms of its rejuvenation, regeneration. It starts to then create conditions that are more likely over an extended period of time to lead to certain behaviors that may show up in different patterns long term, about relationships, it could be around health, but those patterns will definitely start to show up long term within the body.
They do. And I think, Linda, some of those patterns psychosomatically, there's like some key phrases that are like knocking on our door, but our inner door to our outer door saying, please pay attention. And some of those are like, I feel unsupported, or why do I always have to do everything? I have to take care of everything.
Yeah.
And as an example, if that's something that is in your head, what I would ask you to check is, do you have right shoulder pain? Because it's somatically tied to doing, which is the right side of the body. That's one of those things, is overdoing, overgiving, carrying too much. There's key sentences that relate to the body trying to give you information, and that would be one of them. The other one that could tie in exactly to that is so and so is such a pain in my neck.
Yeah. You
And
often,
if, yeah, and if we become too distracted to address why that might be, how we could shift that. And if we're distracted by all these different things, it usually comes down to a stiff neck and you wake up one day and go, I don't know what happened. I must have slept wrong. No, it's an accumulation of avoidance, number one, and too much in the body that hasn't been addressed. And then it will eventually get your attention through pain.
yeah. And in the psychosomatic process, like we obviously take a look at the root cause of illness, but we also use other resources available to us, looking at the emotional component to illness. It's always beneficial to explain to clients the emotional component and just to get their feedback on the words that they resonate with. Because as soon as they, they may have been in a session for an hour and you've already prepared something in regard to health conditions from the emotional perspective, from the psychosomatic perspective, and all of a sudden they're reading in black and white conditions that directly relate to their life story. And it starts
Mm.
to then go, this makes sense at a very deeper level. And coming back to the awareness that Christy was talking about earlier, that's actually then being able to put a landmark in and go, this attitude, this behavior, this style of interaction is creating some long-term stress within my body system, and my body's trying to communicate with me. So how do I then respond to my body's communication? And how a person responds is so critical in terms of starting to listen to the feedback of the body, because as face readers, as body readers, we can also read patterns where people might choose to bypass, to go above and beyond. It's like, I've got responsibilities, I've got things to do. I have the pattern of not wanting to let people down, and yet those responsibilities keep on happening. So once we create an interruption into that pattern, then we can start to actually change how those body symptoms will show up in the body, because the body is starting to feel acknowledged, feel heard. So the very first part, as Christy mentioned, is firstly the understanding, because that understanding is bringing activation into that part of the body.
Yeah. And being curious about why it's being activated.
Yeah.
Why does my right shoulder always hurt? Why is my jaw, my TMJ pain so strong right now? Why am I having constipation or diarrhea? To begin to think of it as an energetic question, not just a physical question. And there again, I believe we have to make space to listen, which means to not be so distracted. And what is that practice for you to listen to your body without having your mind on something? Because I don't think we can listen if we don't teach ourselves how to listen.
Yeah. Yes. Christy, I'm just looking at the chat, and there is one statement here which I just would like to go a little bit further into. I feel like my body is in one place and another part of me is unattached, not connected. So if we can address this question. This is actually not an uncommon experience that people can feel. And often it can happen when there are two different stories or a conflicting story that's in the mind and the body, where you might be carrying more than one story. And so there's a part of yourself that gets pushed aside. You might see it in coping patterns when you're trying to cope with something. So there's part of you that might be, as an example, putting on the brave face, and another part is having a different story, maybe feeling vulnerable, a little bit more threatened. but that creates a separation between how people see you on the outside and how you feel on the inside. And it can occur from being really, really young. When you notice it as a young pattern, um, that disconnect, that feeling of disconnect, can still be very strong. It's certainly something that I had an experience with before I started psychosomatics. I could feel that disconnect as well. And when you come back into coming back home to yourself, that literally feels like your energetic body has returned back into its original form inside of you rather than in front. For me, it was in front. For other people, it could be to the side, to the back, but that disconnect can be like a feeling that you're able to connect with at all times. And of course, if you are presenting stronger than what you're feeling on the inside, also known as the imposter syndrome, when people tell you that you're really strong and you're really confident and you're really amazing, if that's not how you're feeling, instead of receiving those comments in a supported way, it can create more of an aloneness on the inside because you're still not being seen for how you feel on the inside. So usually the only work that can be done on that is the internal work that you need to do. You can be guided through that with somebody who can hold space for that, but the education side of it is really important to be guided back into how do I hold space for myself in a different way whilst learning the skills of connecting with myself and being safe within my body. Christy, can you add to that too, please?
Yeah. I think that what I was thinking of is my first face reading, my first psychosomatic face reading, because I thought I was aware. And what the face reading showed me is I wasn't aware of that pattern of pushing and pushing and pushing, even though I was doing what I thought was work to help me heal. In that disconnect, I wasn't seeing my own shadow aspect of not paying attention to how much I was giving.
Yeah.
And what I love about psychosomatics is why I'm a teacher and why I'm on this call is the information that our bodies give us, like the soft tissue, which is our emotional response, was so much bigger than I had ever thought. And I thought, how can that be true? And yet I'm looking at this face going, it's true, but how is that true? And then that starts the inquiry of, well, okay, how do I begin to work with this in a different way? And it created curiosity about psychosomatics and asking more questions and talking to people who might be able to help guide me to shift that perspective and the pattern in myself.
Yeah.
Because I don't think we're meant to do life alone. We're meant to have people guide and help us along the way.
I love that example, Christy. And in that example, it also really highlights as well the pattern of habitual behavior, habitual patterns that you do. And sometimes you need someone to challenge that pattern, which is what we tend to do in psychosomatics, and go, okay, so I'm hearing you. This is what you do because you really love to do it. By the way, I'm not making this comment about Christy. It's just inspired some thinking. So, but we often do things and think that we're doing it because we love doing it. But then when you actually break it down and slow it down and go, okay, so what if you didn't do that behavior? What if you weren't the person that automatically says yes? And this is where you start to come into like, oh no, but I would need to do that. And what would happen if you didn't? Just sit with that, feel it in your body. What would happen if you didn't? And often it's that point where you first connect in with the distressed part that sometimes up until this particular point in time has actually never been a conscious part. It's just an unconscious part that's running the show because the need to do certain behaviors to feel better creates that I don't have to feel the feeling at all because I'm constantly doing the behaviors to avoid this particular part.
Yeah. And they come from survival patterns from childhood. Most often is where we get those adaptations for being in an environment of how to keep our nervous system functioning at a certain level. So in psychosomatics, that's a great question, Linda. Or an inquiry is, well, how do I feel if I don't do that? Well, it makes me feel like I'm going to throw up. It makes my head start to spin. I'm really starting to get anxiety with that. Beautiful beginning. Where do you feel that? Well, I feel it in my chest, or I feel it in my bowel, or I'm going numb in my head. That's where we begin. That's the awareness piece, is really starting to tap into, what does my body have to say? How am I feeling? How can I listen and access that? And that's not a simple thing. And it's such a funny conundrum, because it sounds intellectually, as we talk about it, Linda, it sounds really simple until we do it.
It does sound simple. It's far from simple.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. My new favorite word is simplexity. The combination of simplicity and complexity, because we are complex human beings. We are very dynamic. Everything changes constantly. Our world changes, we change. And I think in the simplicity of checking in and creating a relationship with ourself is the first step to healing. It doesn't lie in someone else's hands.
No. And yet, as we mentioned, that guidance through how to actually hold yourself in a different way can require that guide. That also the ability to have choice. You know, we often talk about in psychosomatics, when there's a feeling of no choice, it creates a level of stuckness and heavy emotions. And as soon as you start to change your relationship with the whatever's going on and recognize that in most situations there is choice, even if the choice may be uncomfortable. And sometimes it is about going outside of the comfort zone to recognize that you're choosing to do a particular style of interaction, but you have choice. And that can also bring back the empowerment in terms of letting go of some of the resentment that can go with the feeling of no choice.
It's a good example, Linda. And I think when there's an activation, it's difficult to hear our own rhetoric, our own voice. If you hear yourself saying, well, I don't have a choice, I invite you to slow down and ask yourself, if I did have a choice, what might that be? If I had another choice, doesn't mean you have to like it. But if we can start to listen to our own arguments that we have about why we don't make a choice, that's the beginning of making a different choice.
Yeah.
But sometimes it becomes so unconscious, and we talk ourselves out of having a difficult conversation because we don't want to. Because sometimes they're terrible and they're hard and all those things, but yet the body is screaming, please make a different choice. And that's where that, the complexity of making sure that we care for and take care of those parts of us that feel vulnerable or in danger if we make a different choice. It's important to know where that part's coming from. And sometimes I would say, how old is that part? Is that part a childhood part? I'm scared. If I have this, then I won't be loved. All parts of this path of being human and the psychosomatic journey, because the body, the tissue holds the memory. And we want to move the memory and the charge out so we don't get sick.
Yeah. Definitely all parts have validity, regardless of how much we might want to not have access to certain parts within our body. They speak loudly when they're ignored. And if a part feels like it is not allowed to exist, it will show up. It's kind of a
Yeah.
given.
Yeah. Um, I'm going to come back to another question. We have someone asking, we have two questions. Itchy on my left shoulder.
Mhm.
So we'll start with that one first. In psychosomatics, the right and left side. So the right side represents present time. I'm just going to keep this very simple. The left side represents the past. The right side is our doing side. The left side is our receiving. So when I hear I have an itchy shoulder on my left side, so I'm looking at my something possibly in the past. It's right next to the heart as well, literally your heart. And so I would ask, is it on the top of the shoulder or the middle shoulder? I'm going to say it's the shoulder in the middle by your heart, for example. What I would ask is, am I irritated about something that has happened in the past that I haven't quite fully addressed or taken care of or let go of? And often on the left side to it, if the heart space, it's a relationship. And then itchiness is an irritation. So that's a great example of a psychosomatic question. We trace it back to where it is, which side it's on.
Yeah. And we just
I'll
see
let
that
you do the next one, Linda.
I just see that that's popped up with it's in the back. So if it's in the back, it's actually in the past. And again, as Christy just mentioned, because it's also the meeting point of the throat and the heart, and as we shoulder responsibilities. So the irritation could also be in the fact that there's something that you may not be speaking up about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And coming from the past because it's in the back. The next one, let's have a look. Um, I am having a stabbing pain left side back of the hip, particularly when I bend over or sit. I can't seem to fix it. It's been going on for about 2 months now and affecting my posture. Any hints for connection to the emotional? So the hips are all about responsibilities. And as we take a look at hip pain, stabbing pain, whether it's sciatica or something that in that particular area, we are looking at the relationship that's in the base chakra as well as the sacral. And so that is in terms of relationship with others, responsibilities that you might feel like you're carrying. And the questions therefore around that would be, are there any responsibilities that may feel like they're not yours to carry, but that you may also feel like you have no choice but to carry? And that can create like a level of conflict, and sometimes even that conflict can create a little bit of tension. So with the hips going in slightly different ways, that can create pain. But you probably need to also have a look at seeing what's actually aligning in the actual hips themselves to see what's physically happening before we could more accurately describe what was actually happening with that pain from a psychosomatics. So that's just a general overview.
Mm-hmm.
Christy, from your perspective on that one?
Well, I would ask you if you were my client, I would say, because it's the left side and it's in the sacral, it's relationships. And because it's the left side, often it's a relationship with females. Is there 2 months ago when the pain started, did you have an argument? Did something happen 2 months ago that upset you about a relationship? Could be with mother, sister, friend. And that's where the psychosomatic language of one of the key phrases is, oh my God, there's such a pain in my ass.
Actually,
Yes.
I did, Christy. I had a big argument, which was unexpected, with a friend,
Beautiful. Is it male or female?
female.
Okay, thank you. That's a beautiful example, because what happens is the body will contract based on which energy center it's in. So that's in relationships and also vulnerability on the left side. And if it's someone that you really cared about, there's something that's still unresolved within you, whatever that might be. That's what I would be curious about. Because right at this point, it's not about the other person. It's about how is my system resolving or what needs to be repaired within me so I can let go of that charge that's being held in the contraction.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Makes perfect sense.
And with this scoliosis, we're often looking at conflicting views, and sometimes a loyalty towards a particular point of view, whether it comes from the mother, father, or the masculine or feminine. They belong to different attitudes. And so where there's a conflict, you might find that there's an energetic pull over to one side that creates, again, particular behaviors of who you feel you need to be in certain circumstances. And that can lead into directly around about the responsibilities, perceived responsibilities, inherited responsibilities.
Yeah. And I think with any kind of spine pain, to be familiar, become familiar with where it's at in the spine. Is it in my heart space? Is it in my bowel area? Is it in my throat? That's so key in the psychosomatic world, so we can tie it back to the energetics within that area, which we're not going to go in today. But if I would suggest you speak to someone that knows the somatic world and the map, because it's so helpful to understand, okay, if I have pain here, this could indicate these emotions that are tied to it, like the hip pain, for example. And we have frozen arm, right arm pain when I lift the arm. So remember, we talked about right side, present time. Doing is the masculine. I would ask this person, and especially if it's right in this part of the arm, sometimes people get in the shoulder. Is it this part? Do you feel like you have too much responsibility? Are you lifting more than you should?
At times, yes.
Yeah. And where is the pain in your arm?
It is more shoulder. Yeah.
Okay. So as we come closer to the shoulder, we're getting into expression. Is there a boundary that needs to be set to ask for support, ask for help, let someone know where you're at versus assuming and doing more?
Okay.
And that's just general. Those are just questions that I would ask myself, or I would ask you as a client a few more questions about that.
Okay. Thank you.
Barbara, sometimes that's also affected with the emotions as well. So where the emotions may feel like it's not okay to express the emotions. So the emotions kind of have a mind of their own, and they're asking for comprehension. So when you've got a restriction in the ability to lift up your arm, then there's a whole heap of things with your whole hand movement that are affected. And where you haven't spoken up and asked for help, your body's going to make you ask for help. So there can often be a lot about also, even though it's the right side, it's in the doing, you're still going to have to receive more with the left, because your right's going, I've kind of had enough, and I now need to find a different way of expressing what my needs are.
Okay. Thank you.
Key word. There's a psychosomatic word again, frozen. It's not coincidental that that's the word. I literally can't move my arm. It's frozen. It's forcing, if we speak psychosomatically, it's forcing you to ask for assistance. I'm literally frozen. I'm going to have to ask someone to help me do blank. It's as you learn the psychosomatics and the layering with the language, it's so helpful for us as individuals to tie that back into our bodies. And Linda, you were going to talk a little bit about Dr. Gabor Mate.
Yeah, Dr. Gabor Mate, he's such an incredible man to listen to. love his work and the resources that he has available. But one of the areas that he talks about in one of his communications, one of his books, is reading the sorry,
The body says no.
no. Sorry,
That
not
one?
racist, no. No, reading the obituary. So when
Mm.
people have passed away, to actually read what people have said about the person and recognizing that sometimes what a person, how they're described, they do everything for everyone. They were always busy. They never had time for themselves. And he describes this as basically being why people died too young, and to take a look at what behaviors and attitudes shape their sense of self, and how that self or the image that they've created that needs to be that for everyone can actually work against them. So to understand what your natural bias is, why it operates, and again, how you can start to shift some of those behaviors that may not serve the body well. And unfortunately, there can also be other emotions that get stored there. I quite often see people that have stunning, beautiful faces, and yet as I look at their faces, I'm reading anger. And it's like the two stories don't really match very well on their face. And it's like, okay, so what's actually happening here? And it becomes part of the people pleaser role, where the person naturally is very nurturing, loving, kind, but then their generosity is not received because sometimes they're having to give more than what's actually called for. And when it's not received, then they feel underappreciated and then they get angry, but they can't voice the anger because if I voice the anger, you may not like me anymore. And so it gets contained. And a long-term pattern of that becomes a major conflict in the body that creates stress, anxiety, and many, many other health challenges relating to that.
Mm.
And it's
It's
just
such
one,
a,
just one example. Yeah.
yeah. And I think it's important for us to understand what our own responses are when we get triggered, because that's a very good example. One of the responses is taking care of everyone else's needs to stay safe.
Yeah.
To the point of breaking in whatever way and still performing. And that's what, the research that they're finding is, especially with Dr. Gabor Mate, is we push and push and push, and some days it just stops. And we need to understand, which is why we do these calls, what is your response to when there's like if I wouldn't be liked or I don't belong, where does that show up in the body and how do you manage that? What is your go-to response? Because if we don't understand what they are, we can't change them. And we've done a few calls about trauma responses, and we could certainly link that. I'm just looking at a few more here. Right side on my bicep is painful, left side of the neck. Beautiful, beautiful question. Linda, I'll let you do that one.
Right. So right side of bicep. Oh, let me just read it again.
Yeah. Right side of bicep is painful, left side of neck. So that's a great example of psychosomatic.
Yeah. So whenever we're looking at the neck, we're going to be taking a look at the communication style, and again, what you might be withholding. And yeah, it's basically around the communication. So not too dissimilar to what you were referring to before, Christy, on the left-hand side, being on the feminine side. And sometimes when we're looking at that, we can also consider the left to be the private side. So whilst the first go-to point is around the females in the family or the female friends, we also can take a look at, the private life as well. So I would ask some questions just around, things that you may find more difficult to speak up about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next question. Would that fit my left side little finger, which I can't get much movement after my distal radius wrist break? Yes. I would say absolutely.
Communication finger.
Yep. Boundaries, inner boundaries, because the boundaries come from within us, speaking them, holding them for us. Only we can do that. No one else can do that for us. Sometimes I think we wait for other people to notice and meet our needs. And you'll be waiting a long time, maybe. Don't do that. And also, please find out, what are those needs?
Yeah.
Because if we don't know our needs, it's very difficult to meet them.
So going back to the very first part where we spoke at the start of the call, to start to listen to how is your body communicating to you, and how do you nurture your body in terms of the mind, the emotions, and the physical body. So just to think about maybe some areas of small things that you could change, that you would notice how you might feel differently on the inside by making a small change. Chrissy.
Okay. So we have another question asking for a friend. 3rd time breast cancer on the left side. So let's just pause. That's a delicate question, because I think it's challenging. We don't want to, sometimes when things like that happen, they just happen. Okay. And we take it back to psychosomatics and the energetics before it happened. So if we backed way up, conversations I would be curious about are, if we're looking at breast tissue, we're looking at nurturing. We're looking at breastfeeding the world. Right side, over nurturing others to the point that you're giving so much that you're not meeting those needs. Those inner needs aren't being met on the left side because of the overgiving. So it can switch back and forth. But with breast cancer for the 3rd time, I really would love to ask that person as a client, how can I take care of you? How can I support you? And that would be their work, is to start to be curious about, what are my needs and how could I be supported? Because it's truly, some people don't know the answer to that question because it feels selfish. I'm here to serve. I'm here to give. I'm here to nurture. Okay. And let's bring it back to self. How can we nurture self? What is it that's missing? But I say that really lightly because I don't have that in front of me. And cancer, I think it's easy to want to know why. And sometimes that isn't an easy answer.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Whenever you're looking at the emotional conditions, we don't always have the answers with why it's there. But again, that gentle inquiry can provide some insights for the person.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Carolyn Mace teaches about energy medicine. She's on the forefront of that. And she talks about most diseases, I'm going to say most, happen first energetically. And then over time, they become dense and they turn into dis-ease because there's dis-ease in someone's life. There's not a balance. And it's like dripping water in a roof. And eventually that water comes through and floods. So the idea behind this work specifically is to catch it before we can't catch it. And then we have to have other interventions, which is totally great that we have them. And let's try to head them off at the pass.
Yeah. Also with Herman's, he often speak about thoughts, and then thoughts become thought form. So as we start to take a look at the different archetypes in the body, we start to see the patterns of where the body is overdeveloped, undeveloped, we start to recognize that with those patterns, the physical patterns are certain types of behavioral patterns. And sometimes we are predisposed to certain patterns based on our family of origin, our ancestors. And just because it's been in the ancestral line doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to follow through, but we may have a greater possibility of activating some of the conditions that our parents may have also experienced and our ancestors as well. So it is really good to understand that lineage with how something shows up through the generational patterns, because we also learn those patterns.
We certainly do, which kind of ties us into the next question. And I'm going to answer this pretty neutral too, because if cancer metastasizes to the bone, what is related to the bone? And the bone we're looking at, that's what holds all of our DNA and our imprints. Someone could have a pattern within their family system, within how they function, that is out of balance and it hasn't been able to come back into balance. And you're talking about the spine. The spine is about support. And it also has all the nerves that go out to feed and give the body information. So there's lots of questions that I would ask before I answered that question. That's a big ask, especially when it metastasized to the bone. It's gone so far. And yet we could trace questions back somatically to see where it might have had a tendency to begin and be created.
It began in the breast, Christy.
It began in the breast. Okay, so there again, breast, if we bring it back to overgiving, and a lot of times with breast cancer, it metastasizes into the bone. And I don't think that's the fault of anything or anyone. I think that's the process of cancer too, sometimes, especially with breast cancer. The pattern being overgiving, over nurturing, and how am I supporting myself? And then we go to the spine. The spine supports our structure. How could this person better support them even at this stage that they haven't been able to? What could be something that they might need that need could be met? And sometimes it is awareness, and that's really delicate if it gets to that point. However, I do believe the body is highly intelligent and we can make a shift, and that could make a shift in the body and in the health of the body and the long-term change, what that experience might be before something else changes.
Thank you. That's very useful information.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking.
Okay. So in our next conversations, we're going to be going a little bit further into processes and release, and also to answer some further questions that you might have had on the first two parts. So we hope that you've enjoyed today's session, and please feel free to provide any feedback or any comments or any questions to our email address, psychosomaticconversations@gmail.com.
Thank you, everyone. We love your engagement and your support as you come and you watch, the other people that are watching after we record. We really appreciate your support and curiosity. So next time, we have what date next, please? We'll put that, it's the first Friday in the US every month. Well, actually, we're changing it because of the holidays. We'll put it in an email. We'll post that because it changes a little bit because of the holiday.
I think I've got the 13th. Thank you very much. It's wonderful. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.